Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie Marcus, and I'm an educational technologist at the Columbia Center for New Media Teaching and Learning, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's panel on virtual fieldwork for pre-professional education. Fieldwork is an essential component of many pre-professional programs. In fields as diverse as teacher education, social work, medicine, and dentistry, students must integrate what they learn in the classroom with what they do in the field. They must interact with clients and students and experience real-world situations in order to truly make sense of their classroom studies. Yet increasingly, in many pre-professional programs in which students conduct their fieldwork, constrained budgets yield increasingly less time for field supervision and mentorship. This is unfortunate because this mentorship is critical to helping students synthesize their field experience with their classroom learning. The title of today's panel is Virtual Fieldwork. However, we do not mean to imply that digital technology should replace actual practice in the field. Nothing can replace the meaningful experience with working with the clients and patients that these students will be working with when they graduate. Instead, CCNMTL, along with our faculty partners, is looking to use digital technologies to help bridge the gap, if you will, between classroom learning and field practice. And to do this, we hope to enhance opportunities for preparation and reflection on student fieldwork. Virtual fieldwork, as we've been discussing it, can take several forms. It can allow students to explore and reflect on unfamiliar environments without the fear of making mistakes in real-world settings. It can help students build specific skills by skills for interacting with those environments by seeing varying models of real-world practitioners. And virtual fieldwork can allow students to use recordings of their own practice in the field and reflect on the performance of those skills. We have the privilege of being joined by 4 of our faculty partners today who will discuss their virtual fieldwork projects in pre-professional education. Professor Angela Calabrese-Barton from Teachers College, Professor Dr. John Zimmerman from the College of Dental Medicine, Professor Tazuko Shibusawa from the Columbia University School of Social Work, and last but certainly not least, Professor Ginsburg from Teachers College. Today's speakers will discuss their curriculum and the use of 2 technologies that they created in partnership with CCNMTL: video interactions for teaching and learning, which we refer to as VITAL, and the Educational Multimedia Case Constructor, or EMCC. During today's discussion, the panelists will show you examples from these technologies. However, I invite any of you who are interested in learning more about the specifics of each technology to join us right after this presentation in our faculty computer lab in the Burden room right behind us. Representatives from the panel will be there directly following this panel. Today, each panelist will discuss his or her project for about 15 minutes. We will then have time for a hopefully lengthy discussion period, and I invite your questions. But I do ask that you reserve your comments and your questions until after the panelists have finished their remarks.
Today I'm going to talk about preparing science teachers to teach science for diversity and social justice in urban schools through the EMCC. And in science education, or in education generally, we face a huge challenge, and that is to build a teaching force that's prepared to teach in high-poverty urban schools. And this is a challenge for 2 main reasons. First of all, because most teachers who teach in urban settings don't grow up in urban settings. They don't know the culture necessarily well. They don't necessarily know the students. They move to these settings with good intentions, but they don't necessarily have the skills or knowledge base to work effectively there. And then they're also faced with the realities of life in high-poverty urban schools. These schools tend to be under-resourced, and there is a high teacher turnover rate. So what we've been trying to do at Teachers College in science education is to design an experience that helps to provide teachers with the skills that they need to be effective teachers in high-poverty urban schools. In the past, we've relied heavily on field experiences to do this, but we know that we have a difficult time bridging the experiences in the field with the experiences in the classroom, and this is where the EMCC has been crucial to helping teachers build the skills and mindsets that they need to do well. And so Project UVA, which is the name we use in our class to describe sort of the whole environment around EMCC, does just that. It bridges the constructs that we talk about in our class with the 30-hour field experience that our students are required to have in conjunction with the class. So Specifically, what Project Juva and the EMCC does is delve in depth into two key areas that we cover in our class. Our class, as you can see from this figure, covers 4 main domains. 2 of those domains are the science teaching as culturally responsive and looking at those key constructs that you can see next to that, and then empowering pedagogical tools, and that's the piece that pulls the other 3 themes together closely, and you can see the main constructs that we use there. And Project Juva, or the EMCC, helps us to do that. How does it do that? Well, as you've guessed from what Debbie said in her opening remarks, it's a digital case-based learning environment. And in that environment, in our class, we rely on 3 cases: the ownership case, the sustained interest case, and the agency case. These cases are based on data that we've generated through the Urban Science Education Center and work with partner schools. And so, as you'll see when we walk through the cases in just a minute, it uses real data, video clips from kids generated by researchers, field notes generated by researchers, generated by teachers, and so on. We use the EMCC specifically in weeks 6 through 12 of the class, and then again at the very end to pull things together. So let's then actually look at the EMCC and how it's set up. Well, like I said, we have 3 cases, and the design of those cases is based on a set of pedagogical values that we think will help our students link what we're discussing in our class with what's going on in the field. First and foremost is this notion of shared experience. When we have students in the field, I mean, if we have a class of 25 students, obviously we can't put 25 Teachers College students in one middle school classroom. That's overwhelming for the kids. It's overwhelming for the space. And so our students are spread across many different classrooms. And so when they come back to our classroom at the university to discuss what's going on, we don't necessarily have that shared field experience. And it's difficult for me as instructor to know exactly what each student is doing in each space. And so it's difficult for me to oftentimes challenge their thinking or to help them think about things in other ways, because they come in with their own subjective understanding and presentation of what they've seen. Because this environment provides shared data, shared assets for us to look at, we can help each other build on our ideas in a very rigorous and deep way. It engages our students in authentic data, as I've mentioned before, but controlled in the sense that I know what they're going to see, and I know when they're going to see it. It's also scaffolded and situated. Like I said, I know when they're going to see it, and I know how to help them get through it, and their peers can also help them get through the data as well. Multiple perspectives, as you'll see when we show you the cases in just a minute, is crucial to the design of this environment. It's not just a researcher perspective or even my perspective as a teacher-educator of life in these schools. We have video clips that have been created by students. We have reflection notes that have been created by middle school students, and notes that have been created by teachers, and so on and so forth, because what we want is a very rich set of data that our students can access to get at some of the key issues in urban science education from lots of different lenses. And oftentimes the data clips that we use in these cases contradict each other. What a student might be saying about something is going to look very different than what a teacher might be saying about something, which again might look different from what the researcher's saying. But we want that dissonance in class because we want students to really begin to process things in a complex way. And finally, all of this is based in what we call grounded discussions. And grounded discussions are those discussions where we work really hard to have our teacher education students make evidence-based claims. We want to push them beyond opinion. And if we have this shared environment, we can do that because we can say, what's your evidence? And then we can go back to the clip and we can open up that clip together as a class and look at it and then talk about why did you take the interpretation that you took and so on. Or we can even say, you know, as you go back into the field and you want to explore this idea more, what kinds of questions might you ask in your field placement? What kinds of, you know, mini interviews might you conduct with students and so forth? So now what we'll do is we'll look at the setup of the cases so you can see how these pedagogical values play out. Okay, so when you log into the EMCC, what you see is this page here that says cases. This is what the students see. And you can see that we have the 3 cases, the ownership, the agency, and the sustained interest. And we work with our students in them actually in that particular order. But the nice thing is that we can actually use them in any order that we want. And there's the abstract. It shows the student what the case is about. And then, so we'll click on ownership since that's the first case that we use with our students. And when you click on the ownership case, it brings you to the home page for that case. It gives you a little abstract, tells you what the case is about. And then our cases are framed by what we're calling case questions. These are the questions that we want students to be able to answer by the end. They're not too narrow, such that they require some exploration, but they're not too broad, such that students can actually come up with a thoughtful, coherent response to these questions in a couple of pages by the end of their experience in this environment. And so how we structure the experience in the ownership case is we want students to then begin with a question. So the first question in this case is, what qualities define student ownership? And so you click on that case. And what you see here is a lot, actually. But what is most important, see that says my essay. When students originally log on for the first time, that part's blank because that's where their essay goes. And what they see is a whole bunch of reference media. And that media are those data clips I've been talking about. And the little symbol on the left tells the student what kind of data clip it is. So, for example, in this case, we have some researcher-generated notes. We have some student-generated and researcher-generated video. So, for example, if we click on We Are Smart, it has a little video sign next to it. What the student will see is a video that is...
So is there another time that you can remember, before or after, where you
stand ground and say, I'm not done with this yet? Yeah, or just add it.
So you're like, no, I want to do this, no, but I want to put this on this, no, but that one is nice, and it's like that, no, but we got to do it perfect, you know? I guess that was our whole argument in the movie was all about that, you know? Like, we want to be professional, make up a movie that people would be like,
But why did it matter that it was perfect?
In my point of view, I guess we wanted to show what we were made of, you know, that to show other people that we're, even though we're young or whatever grade we was in, that we were still smart. And we were capable of doing whatever whatever they did. You know, if they did that, we could do it too, you know? We're not less than them, you know?
Yeah, that's cool.
I actually like that particular clip because one of the stereotypes that many of our students come to urban science education with is that students in high-poverty urban schools don't care very much about science. They don't necessarily care very much about their academic lives. And yet here's an 8th grader talking about how he worked on this video clip, or not this video clip, this actual movie that they showed to the 6th grade, put the degree of effort into it, which was an extensive amount of effort, because he wanted his teachers and his peers to know that he was smart and that he has a lot to offer the world of school and the world of science. And that clip actually generates a lot of discussion in my class. What you see on to the right of the video is what's called the notes. And what our students can do when they access this environment is, as they're listening to the clip and replaying it, they can jot down whatever their thoughts are as they're thinking about it, which helps them to remember, initial thoughts. They can make connections to some of the readings that they're doing around ownership and other readings associated with this. And then when they go to write their essay at the end, they can access all their notes. And that helps them both to remember what they were thinking, but also helps them to make evidence-based claims. So what we want them to do in their essays actually is to reference actual clips, and the demo notes allow them to do that. Now, let's say, for example, that a student is doing the ownership case and they think, I really need to know a little bit more about the school, the neighborhood that the kids are coming from, and so forth. Well, all they have to do is go back to the main page of the case, and under full description, you'll see supplemental material. And what that supplemental material is contextual information. It gives you information about the school, so the school's report card, as one could access on the web anyway, a review of the school by InsideSchools.org, a description of the project that is described in the ownership case, description of the students, and so forth. And so it really gives the students a really comprehensive look at who these students are and how it is exploring some of these assets can help them think about ownership in science. You can also access the data assets in another way. You don't necessarily have to go directly in through the case or the case question. You can go right to the media library. And this is really helpful to the students when they're working on their essays, because what you can do here is you can see all of the assets that we have, and you can sort them based on however you want to sort them. So let's say a student says, you know what, those researcher notes were kind of helpful, but really I found what was most helpful were the video clips with students. That's actually what our students tell us a lot. So what you can do is just sort it by author. And so, well, now it gives you all the researcher ones on top. You can actually keep clicking it till you get whichever ones you want on top, but I'll just scroll down. And you can see student-generated stuff right here. And then you can also sort it by form. So whether you want it text or video, that's the media type, or the data type, is it a commentary, is it field notes, and so on. And then you can also sort it by, which ones did I actually write notes on? To help you with your cases and so forth. So there are a lot of different ways that students can access the data here, which I think gives them flexibility in exploring the ideas and then in constructing an argument around the case questions that we think are so important to learning in our class. These are quotes actually taken from the essays that students prepared in the ownership agency cases. And so there are two claims. One is that they are beginning to think about context differently. They're beginning to think about what they're seeing in schools differently. First of all, by the kinds of theoretical connections they're making between the articles that they're reading and what they're seeing in the cases. So, for example, in this first quote here, the one on top, she was using a case that focused on this one focused on agency, but we had been talking about this notion of composite culture a few weeks prior to that, and she was bringing that construct into some of the things she was saying there. And so for us, that was a powerful learning moment for the student. They're making strong connections to the field, as you can see in the quote in green. Here, this student began to, in this case, I think this was in the ownership case, she was drawing back on an experience she had 3 years ago when she was working in the zoo and saying, wow, I really think that's sort of the same thing that I'm seeing in these cases. And then this third quote that you see here in yellow, you can see that this teacher saying, one of the things the students were really shocked about was the condition of the school. They expected a highly decrepit school, and you might see that in high-poverty urban settings, but you'll also notice that this school, even though it is an under-resourced school, lacks a lot of good science supplies, and serves a high-poverty population, is actually a very beautiful building. And that was shocking to her. And so just knowing that they're seeing these things and then raising questions, and so she began to ask questions about, so what's the difference between poverty and high poverty? And because we could see that question in her writing about the case, we could attend to that in class. That was a question that she actually didn't ask out loud and raise her hand because she might have been afraid or embarrassed to ask a question like that, but it came up in the case and we could attend to it. Students in our class are also beginning to think about pedagogy differently. They're developing new strategies. So as you can see in this quote from 80, she is, from the agency case, beginning to think about, well, I could do this in my class, and maybe we should be doing this in our classes, and maybe we should be doing this. In the green quote from Ben, we can see how he was very specific in this quote here. He said earlier in this essay he never really thought about agency before, and in that last sentence how he talks about how he has to work with students to negotiate some kind of compromise, coming up with an idea in his mind about how he might actually make that happen in his classroom. And then finally, we require these evidence-based claims in their essays, otherwise we send them back and say rewrite it. But you can see how they're citing the different assets in there. Now, I've made this sound like it's a really wonderful tool, and it really is a wonderful tool, but we're not left without our own tensions and without our own struggles as teacher educators. And there are 3 tensions that I'm going to very quickly address. And the first tension is that even though these cases are vehicles of inquiry and debate, as case participants, our students as case participants, they're still often positioned as detached observers. They can't get into those environments that they're watching. They can get into the field, and so we're still struggling with, even though we think we've designed case reflections to help them get into it, and we've made assets such that they come from multiple perspectives, which we think helps them not to be detached observers, we're still thinking about how can we have new and different kinds of interactions between the EMCC and their field-based experiences. And we're moving towards actually thinking about how to help students take and design some of their own cases that parallel in structure and form the kinds of cases we set up here from their own field experiences. And can we put them into a case constructor so that those cases can be shared with their peers? The second tension that we have is that cases lead learners to situated generalizations or grounded interpretations. Yet, most importantly, these pre-service teachers are going to be taking positions as teachers. And so we need them to recontextualize their interpretations to their field-based experiences. Otherwise, they won't be the effective urban science teachers that we want. And so we're really thinking hard about, so even though the cases that they interact with in the EMCC come from two different environments, we're still thinking hard about how can we scaffold that in such a way that they can begin to make those kinds of connections so that when they are in their teaching positions a year later, that they can recontextualize what they've learned. And finally, even though cases are situationally grounded, they're also very neat stories. I mean, we very carefully chose the assets that we want them to interact with. And we've chosen the order. In some cases, at least, we want you to do ownership first, we want you to do agency second, and so forth, even though they have flexibility within those. When they get out to the field, life in the field is not neat and it's not orderly. And so how can we help them navigate having all of these ideas come at them at once? And in what ways can we expand an environment like EMCC or expand our usage of an environment set up like EMCC to help students navigate the complexities of life in real classrooms? And so that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
So I'm from the dental school, and the class that I teach is a first-year course. It's called the Scientific Inquiry and Decision Making in Dentistry. We have 76 students. I don't have a TA. We do everything ourselves up there. So it's a lot of work. And the course is a very broad course. It's an introduction to the patient and to the culture of medicine. And a lot of focus and a lot of time in the course is spent dealing with biostatistics, epidemiology, reading scientific papers, interpreting the results. And most of our students come assuming that they'll never have to write essays and they're only going to treat patients. So we need to also make sure that our students are sensitive to the culture and to the individuals and the patients as people, not as just something that you give drugs to or do procedures to. So it's a challenge of balancing the culture of medicine, the humanistic approach, along with the science approach, is what I have to deal with in the course. So in the first week of school, I actually get them to examine their own health beliefs and their biases they may have, and they may bring to practice. And I ground this in that if they do have biases, then they aren't collecting good data from the patient, so they may not be able to properly treat the patient. We've tried to teach cultural competency, we call it, to the students in the health sciences, and it's very tricky because a lot of the materials that's presented are they just stereotype the patients. They're like these old videos, and the hairdos are really old, and the students start laughing and making fun just at the actors, and it's not very good. So it's how do we do this? How do we create this? And they don't get to see patients for 2 years when they get into dental school. So they're really anxious to do real dentistry and real medicine, but we stick them in the classroom for 2 years. So this was a way to get them thinking about being sensitive to patient beliefs, to be able to practice listening to patients, to reflect on what the patients are saying, what they're bringing to the healthcare situation. And using VITAL, we did this in a matter of probably a week or two. I was already into teaching the course, and he said, I saw this, let's give it a try and see what happens. So it is pretty easy. It isn't like it took a lot of time to get it developed. Our challenges were, in teaching cultural competency, lectures really don't work. You can't just stand up and lecture about different cultures, and you can't get the students to be competent in all cultures either. So it's a sort of misnamed concept, I think. As I said, the students don't have a lot of clinical experience. And the other thing I use, it's called a learning mnemonic, to sort of get the students to work through a culturally sensitive response, and I'll show you how we use that in the assignment. But this gave them a private space that they could, work with a sensitive topic and actually, I think, explore their own biases and beliefs and see how that may happen. And in selecting the videos that I used here, I've taught the course before, and I have them write their own personal beliefs and examine their biases. And one of the things came out is that quite a few of the students, one bubbled up to the top, was they said, I would have trouble dealing with a homosexual patient. If I knew they were gay, that's going to be problems for me. Now, I was at least glad they said, I know this is going to be a problem, I'm going to have to work through it. But then that enabled me to sort of focus some of the videos in this area so I could select things to get the students to work on. This is the learning mnemonic, which is listen, explain, acknowledge, recommend, negotiate, involve, never negate, and gather. Okay? And this is what they're supposed to use when they're looking at the video. And what I'll do is go through here and show you how it works, how the students interacted, how a faculty interacts with it to see what it's like. And this is the faculty sort of front end. And there's assignments, the digital library, the workspace, and you'll see that you can have different assignments come up. There was a list of all the students here saying whether they completed it, when they completed the assignment. And then we can go through here and we'll view what an assignment would look like for a student. And I'm the student in this case. Okay? And we can edit it to see how their working environment looks. So this is their workspace, and there's an assignment, and sometimes there's various assignments, but this one's on cultural competencies. And there's a space where they can write, and then here's their instructions for their assignment. So they would look at this first, and you see here's this listening mnemonic, so I'm asking them to use that as a guide when they're looking at the video, and then to look at some other things. How would you do it differently? And we also discuss it's called HIPAA, that privacy, confidentiality thing. So they're supposed to look at those issues too in these situations. So then they'll go through, and they need to have video clips. As you see, we don't have any yet, which they can work with in their workspace. So they'll go to the library, the digital library, where I post the video clips that I want them to review, and they have their choice of which ones they want to work with.
You said you're having some headaches and this is a school? Yeah, I feel bad. Okay.
So this is a little clip from ER, and what we found by watching ER is that there's these very small subplots that go through the show, and they actually end up being about 5 minutes long when you put them all together, and they're all about a little patient encounter. And they were actually very good and very moving and engaging. So that's what we use, and they have different topics. So we pulled them out and we use them. And so what the students do is they watch the video, they can pick a start time and end time, they can name their clip, and take little notes about what the clip was about so they can remember. And this will help them when they're constructing their essay to put in evidence of, why they believe or what's going on.
Where in your head is it? Here.
Now here you can see clicking the start time.
How many have these?
A month.
How often?
All the time, I guess.
Okay, and an end time. Okay, so now you have the start and the end time. You save your selection. And they can collect multiple clips as they go through. Okay. So once they're done getting all of their clips, it'll go to their workspace. And now we'll go back to our workspace where our assignment was, and you'll see the clip that I made is now in that workspace. And they'll often do more clips. You'll see at the end, I'll show you a student example. Again, it goes through their instructions, and now they go to the essay area, and they begin to write what they saw, reflect on what they're looking at, and then insert a clip which will be evidence for that.
Where do they access their notes from that they originally had?
You can open up the clip then. I to actually show you that. We could show you that later then. pop up, and then they can keep on writing, okay? And then they can save it, just to make sure they don't lose anything as the computer crashes and the network goes down in between, okay? And they can view what it would look like when they present it. And you can see it changes it. It gives it a little name, the start and the end time. And when they click on this, it'll pop up and show the clip.
How long do you have these? How often?
Okay. And then when they're finished writing, they hit submit, and that ends up actually making a completed project. They can't go back and change it after it's been submitted. So you can save it in between. It's sort of like doing student online grading. Okay. Now if we go back to the assignment page, as a faculty member, I can go in and see ones that have been done, and then I can view them. I can view them online, or I can print them, and you can see that mine's completed. And if I view it, here it is, very short. I was surprised at how much the students actually wrote. Dental students aren't usually great at like sitting down and writing long tomes on these things. But here's a student. I asked him if I could use his aside. This was a very good student. First time ever happened too. 2 weeks before the exam, he sent me a 30-page Word document where he went through every lecture, every objective, and wrote an answer, and then asked me if I could check it for him. I said, no, that's good, but I'm not going to check it. But I never had a student do this before. But he's very good in statistics, and he's very good in epidemiology, and he did a very good cultural competence. And that's what we look for. We want, very culturally sensitive clinicians. So this is his assignment. Oh, sorry, back there. Assignment. And in his assignment, he actually was very reflective. And what I found is the students were able to identify the various parts in the assignment where they, in the video clip, where the patient was maybe communicating something to the physician was not picking it up, and they would go back and reflect on how they would do it better, what was going wrong. And the part that I think is most important is what I need to come up with is to find a way to improve the assessment rubric. How do I evaluate these? So how do I grade these, and what do I do with them afterwards? And just shaking your head. So I'm looking to, we have a meeting, Cultural Competency, where we have people from social work working with us at the health sciences. And this is where I think we can get a lot of input from them of then how to bring the students back together again, address some of these topics that they come up with, and deal with that. We also, in the third year, this is when they begin to see patients, they have a patient interviewing course where they actually tape each other. And so we want to be able to incorporate this again. So we're now talking with the faculty member in the third year and bring this back into the third year. And we may actually use some of the student videos of themselves and get them to critique that. But the students, I found, are very good. And I guess what we have to do is make sure that the virtual field work is actually carried out in the clinic. And we also, I think, need to get our faculty to understand how to watch for these cues, because they are monitored in the clinic fairly closely. We do see all the students in our clinic. We have a lot of control over that, to make sure that they're implementing these. And they do realize that a lot of time they know what to do, but it's the pressure of time when it comes to treating a patient that these other things slip by. So we're quite pleased with the implementation. We want to carry it a lot further. It's pretty easy to implement and start up. But we need a lot more work in, I think, following up what to do with after the exercise is what we're going to be looking at now.
Okay, I'm Tazuko Shibusawa, and I feel very honored to be here today. I'm going to be presenting on how we use VITAL that Dr. Zimmerman just presented on at the School of Social Work. And Debbie asked us all to sort of address certain issues, the challenges of integrating fieldwork and coursework, the role of VITAL in addressing these challenges, some of the lessons that we've learned from using VITAL, and then future directions and challenges. VITAL is a very collaborative project at the Columbia University School of Social Work, and so I'd like to really acknowledge Dr. Susan Oppenheim, Marian Rydell, Mary Sermonti, who were part of the curriculum development, and also teaching along with Drs. Peggy O'Neill, Susan Woody, and Joanne Geraldman, especially this past semester. And Mercedes Del Rosario, who's a doctoral student at TC, who's been helping us, and also Debbie Marcus, who's been the educational technologist, who's been working with us a lot. Okay. Challenges, integrating fieldwork and coursework in social work education. In our master's program in social work, field education, the required hours are 1,200 hours. So this means that for a 2-year full-time student, they are in the field 3 days a week at agencies, such as hospitals, psychiatric clinics, homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, at child guidance clinics, and they are supposed to receive weekly 1.5-hour supervision from a licensed social worker or a certified social worker who has been trained on how to do supervision. And fieldwork has always been the hallmark of the social work education process. However, there's been a lot of challenges in the field with decrease in funding, especially to agencies. There's decrease in availability of quality supervision, or also the time that supervisors can spend for supervision. And also with managed care, students have less clients that they can work with long-term. And it's through long-term work that we learn so much about ourselves and also about clients and develop clinical skills. And so we really felt that this was an area that CCNMTL could help us address. And in 1999, David Van Esselstein, who used to be an educational technologist here and who is here today in the audience, started working with us in this thing called Third Space, which I'll talk about in a second. And then gradually we were able to incorporate VITAL to take place of Third Space. Third Space is basically, the concept is sharing clinical case materials through digitized videos that we could share in the classroom as well as hopefully with the field. So we wanted something that both the field instructors and the students could share. And it was a space for learning which enhances teaching objectives for clinical social work practice skills. So we wanted a space where students could really observe clinical material and interact with the clinical material, analyze the content and process of what goes on between a social worker and their clients, self-reflect on what they were doing, and also be able to articulate what they were doing. And this takes place in fieldwork supervision as well as in the classroom. So we've gone through many renditions of Third Space. David Van Esselstein helped us with using a commercial web board, and we started with a couples therapy class, which Susan Oppenheim and I teach. We put student role plays on the web and had a discussion board, and Stephanie, who's filming today, she also filmed the videotapes for the student role plays as well. We also tried the Real Player, which was a little noisy, as you can see. And we also tried putting videos, digital videos on Courseworks as well. But it was a little more cumbersome in terms of students discussing case material and winding and rewinding videotapes on Courseworks. And so we were really delighted when VITAL came along. And so we have now been using VITAL at the School of Social Work, and Dr. Zimmerman has described the functionalities of VITAL, so I really won't go into it right now. So what we have done at the School of Social Work is we started with clinical practice with couples. It's a 7-week intensive skill-based class on how social workers do couples work or couples therapy. And we expanded it with an academic quality fund from Columbia University, just as the Science Frontiers of Science curriculum was developed through a grant from Columbia. So we were also able to get a grant from the university to implement VITAL in all advanced clinical courses in the second year for faculty who chose to do so. Just again to give you a little description or context, our master's program, we have 5 different methods that students specialize in the second year. So we implemented it in the advanced clinical social work practice concentration, which is the most popular concentration at our school. Over 61 students choose this, and right now this year we have 277 students out of 452 second-year students. Another complication is that in advanced clinical social work practice, we have various fields of practice that students specialize in. So the second-year clinical class, students can take courses that specialize in gerontology or contemporary social issues, family and children, or health, mental health. So we have students taking the basic advanced clinical practice course, but within different topic areas. But we also believe that basic skills that they need to develop are the same, which is how to engage with the client, how to assess, how to contract the work with the clients, how to define the problem or solution, bringing in specific interventions for depression or family issues, how to use ourselves professionally, and cultural competence. And so we decided that there were several common topics that needed to be taught or were being taught, and that we would use VITAL to address these topics. And this was advanced interview skills, conscious use of professional self in the context of power and privilege. That means how do we recognize our own privilege or our own power that clients don't have, and how do we work in a way that our lenses that are biased by our own privileges don't get in the way? How do we work with issues of loss and grief and termination? And CCNMTL helped us create an administrative function where faculty could select and import certain videos that they wanted, and I wanted to show you what that looks like right now. So this is sort of a demo site, and we have a digital library with over 25 videos, digital videos that faculty can choose from. Each has a title, the skill that each video will work on or teach, the clinician description, and the client description. We also have in the workspace, and you're already familiar from Dr. Zimmerman's description, all the different videotapes, but also assignments. So, for example, with a videotape called Machismo, we ask the students to view the Machismo video and read toward a better understanding of the use of psychodynamically informed treatment with Latinos and the myth of sameness among Latino men and their machismo, and then identify and critique the skills that are used by the clinician. So the students can also, if it comes up, what's supposed to come up, and I won't spend too much time with this, is from ProQuest. Here it is. So the articles are already linked, so the students can go directly to the articles, and then they could go into the digital library, and then they would watch Machismo.
You know, you've been here several times, and the last few times when we talked about your dad. You told me he was like this macho kind of guy.
Yes.
What does that mean when you say he's real macho?
Like he don't put up with nobody.
You don't put up with nobody? Has he always been that way?
So this is just an example of a videotape that students can watch and critique and talk about, pick up the skills that the clinician is using, and then clip and paste and create a video essay that Dr. Zimmerman described. And through doing that, I wanted to now describe about what we've learned. So far, we've offered, since 2003, 15 sections in the couples course, and 400 students have taken it. And last fall, 10 sections were offered using VITAL for the advanced clinical practice course, and 200 students have taken it. And as the speakers mentioned this morning in the earlier panel, one of the wonderful things about working with CCNMTL is that they help us evaluate. And so we have very good ways of evaluating, and these are the things that we found so far. That students find that they are more motivated and engaged with the materials when we use Vital, that they have an enhanced understanding and application of theoretical constructs, which I think Dr. Calabrese-Barton also talked about. They're able to identify clinical skills that can be used to other clinical settings, and skills development, their ability to be more specific about interventions. And this is really an important aspect in our teaching, and so I wanted to talk a little bit more about this. We did a quasi-experimental design where students just watched the videos online on the digitized library, and then we also did one class where students were asked to create video essays where they clipped and posted certain segments, and we found that those students who used the copy and clipping and creating a video essay were able to list larger numbers of potential interventions, and they provided greater specificity of interventions, like they were able to say when, where, why, and how. And I think you mentioned the notion of evidence-based, right? So we really want evidence-based citations so that for example, what we found in these video essays is an example would be somebody who would just write a traditional essay or without using the video clips, they would say things like, with a couple situation, what would you do? The student would write, I would offer equal airtime while validating both partners' concerns. Initially, I would not challenge their choices or reasoning so as to strengthen the therapeutic relationship. As the session progresses, I would introduce the idea of compromising and asserting one's needs. So this is very generic. Whereas the student using video essays is able to say, when partner D says blah, 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 I would intervene and say blah, blah, blah. Then I would look at partner T, and say blah, blah, blah. This would allow D and T to feel acknowledged and heard. At the end of this interaction, I would then intervene by pointing out that. So we're getting very specific descriptions of what they would do, which we aren't able to do through a traditional essay or not using clippings, video clips. So I think that's the strength of Vital and the ability to use video clips of clinical material. Too bad we don't have George Clooney in any of them. Okay. So, future directions. I think that this is really useful for teaching evidence-based clinical treatment modalities. And, for example, this semester we're going to be using interpersonal psychotherapy for depression, 16th session evidence-based treatment modality using Vital to teach. And we're hoping that perhaps we can do other evidence-based treatment modalities, such as teaching complicated grief therapy treatment, which was developed by Dr. Scheer, who's now on our faculty, and we're really excited about that. Also, collaboration with other Columbia University professional schools, as Dr. Zimmerman mentioned, around the areas of cultural competence, because our social workers work with physicians, dentists, nurses. And so if we could start now, before everybody graduates and goes into their respective fields, if we could really start to share materials, it'll be great for social work students to see how physicians need to learn about cultural competence, or nurses, and vice versa, and really share. And I think that in itself is great interdisciplinary learning as well. And also we hope that we can involve more of agencies and field supervisors so that perhaps they can use some of these digitized videos in the field and discuss the videos with their students, or also offer our cutting edge or our understanding of state-of-the-art treatment modalities, so that the field instructors and agencies can start to learn what's out there in the field from the research area as well, so that there will be a better integration between the school and the agencies. Challenges, and this is something that I've really become aware of this semester, since last semester, is accessibility for students with disabilities. I currently have a student with a vision impairment. This is very challenging, and last year I had a student with an auditory impairment. So we don't want this technology to really take away from students with disabilities, and I think CCNMTL works magic with technology. So I know that somehow with collaboration with the Office of Disability Services, that perhaps we can also come up with ways that this technology will work with students with disabilities as well. So, thank you.
I've been using Vital to help students of early childhood to learn about mathematics education for little children and how to do this. There's teach math to 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and upward through early elementary school. And this is a very challenging thing for several reasons. It's hard to bridge the gap between the world of university education and preschool education and early education. So actually I call this talk Graduating from University to Preschool. So several of the barriers are that, for one thing, many of the students don't think that math education is a good thing for little children, and probably in general. Many of them don't like mathematics themselves and are scared of it. Many of them are not fond either of psychology, particularly cognitive psychology. And many of them don't see the relevance of what we teach at Teachers College to what they do in the classroom. But on the other hand, there are some encouraging factors. One is that these students are genuinely interested in children and they're really committed to their welfare. So we've been using Vital for several years in this process of teaching students about early math. And you've seen different features of Vital from the other panelists. And in our course, a really key component is the final project. And in this final project, this is now toward the end of the year after the students have done the assignments, they've looked at this extensive digital library, they've read the stuff, they do a lot of things. So they do a final project in which they have to go out to a school, develop a new lesson, or actually hopefully develop the new lesson before they go out to the school, conduct this lesson with kids, videotape their own teaching, have a partner videotape typically. After the lesson, interview at least one of the children about what was actually learned. Now, what was actually learned does not necessarily correspond with what was intended to be taught. And then they write a paper about this whole process in the Vital environment. And in that paper, they're supposed to be citing evidence, justifying their conclusions, and so on. So we've been doing this. We have, I don't know how many final projects already, probably 150 or so, something like that. And studying these final projects and reading them very carefully, which I can tell you takes a lot of work, because you have to actually watch the videos that they did. It's really taught me a lot about what adult learning is all about in the university. And that's what I really want to focus on today rather than the technology. I think, frankly, as a professor, I never thought very much about my students' learning, even though I'm a sort of cognitive psychologist of children's learning. But when it came to me, I didn't really think too much about what these students are learning, except, are they doing well or something like this. So I want to talk, so studying these projects has really illuminated for me some aspects of adult learning. I think it overlaps quite a lot with what the other speakers have said. And so what do we want our students to learn so that they can graduate Columbia with enough skill to be able to get admitted to preschool as teachers? So presumably they learn some content in the traditional sense of remembering who said what some key terms are and all this. We don't have to give examples of that. But there are a lot of other things that go on. One is that they learn non-traditional video content. They come back to me even several years later, and they say, I remember that video of Rachel counting carrots in her mind. And they say, that was amazing, and that image never left me. I think this is and a lot of students say this. Say, what do you really remember from the course? They remember some of the videos in a very meaningful way. And I think it's a sort of memorable kind of dynamic image. I think of it as the digital analog of a Jungian archetype that maybe people don't know anymore what Jungian archetypes are. Anyway, it's a very powerful image that conveys a great deal of meaning to these students. They learn to observe carefully. So here's what a student wrote. During this pattern lesson, the children seem to understand the strategies being taught. They look at the repeated items in the pattern, they correctly guess. During the pattern story, the children are able to say the next part of the verbal pattern, often without being prompted. So this student is looking very, very carefully at the children in the class. Remember, there are a fair number of kids. During the pattern activity, children are able to follow directions. They're also able, and look at this one. The blue, by the way, are my comments, right? Not the students. They're also able to guess the color of the next square, often by looking behind them, demonstrating an understanding of the strategy of looking back to know what comes next. So if you're standing on the blue square and you want to predict what comes next, you should look in back of you to see what was before. Okay? So the students learn to observe very carefully. They also learn to ask. That is, they learn that observation isn't enough and that you have to intervene. You have to do some questioning, some clinical interview type questioning, or you have to do some kind of experiment. You need to change the conditions in order to get useful information. I have examples of all of these, but we won't have time to do that. I can show them to you later. They learn to think critically about what they see and what they find from asking. A number of people have stressed evidence-based learning here. So they think about what it means and try to draw conclusions from it. Let me give you a fairly extended example of that. So after the lesson, Nico chooses the blue to follow the orange, and he points to this last blue. And she writes, this could be interpreted as, an understanding of the strategy of looking back and a realization that the blue in the sequence should be repeated. However, so now she has some contradictory evidence. When Nico is presented with the actual beads, and so he changes his answer and chooses the green because green is my favorite color. He also reminds me, remember when I picked the green bead? And this could be a reference to the initial interview in which he chose the green bead. The kid remembered this, which is interesting. It's possible that due to the fact that I did not correct him the first time he chose the green bead, he feels he should choose it again. It's also possible that this changes his motivation. So we have these conflicting hypotheses that the student is making. So she's not thinking in black and white terms, it has to be this or that, but she recognizes that the evidence could be interpreted in different ways. So they learn to interpret what they see. They learn to reflect on their own practice. We have many cases where these student teachers will start saying, well, I wonder why I did this, and maybe I ought to do things differently. They learn the content in a personally meaningful manner. As they relate what happens in the classroom, they relate what happens in the university classroom to their own personal experiences in their classrooms. They don't do school learning just for the sake of school learning. That is our school learning. Right? They transform it into something meaningful and at the same time faithful to the essence of the formal knowledge that we're trying to get across. They integrate what they see into the literature. We see a lot of cases where the students will say, well, this happened in my classroom, and it's just like what so-and-so was talking about. Right? So it's not just learning to repeat back to us what so-and-so said in the literature. It's relating this everyday experience to that. They are concerned with methods in a very interesting way. We teach them clinical interviewing and observation. They go out and try these methods, and then they come back and say, well, this method could be appropriate for this, but not necessarily for that. And so they start to understand the limitations of methods, the strengths and limitations, instead of just, again, memorizing the method in a sense. They apply the content to their everyday working lives. This is the biggest issue for us in making this bridge. We're trying to help them learn certain things in our classroom, and then they want to we want them to be able to apply it to the clinic, to the classroom, and so on. And one very interesting thing that I've begun to learn is that they learn to adjust their larger conceptual frameworks, their ideologies, and their values as they go through this process. And let's look at an example of that. She said, first of all, this is another example. I was impressed how quickly the students are able to grasp this new method of looking at maps. She's teaching these preschoolers about using maps of the room. I presented them with materials and questions, but didn't actually tell them what to do. They came up with these answers on their own. I also found it remarkable that Jeffrey and Alba both came up with their own ways of using letters and numbers to describe different locations on maps. These are little kids. It reminds me of Angie's work with understanding the abilities of the urban kids. And some of these kids are urban kids, too. At first, I thought their wrong answers were due to carelessness. More closely, I saw that they were simply using what to them was logical reasoning. It's interesting to me as an educator and gives me a lot to think about. And there are other cases where we've seen them have a kind of dramatic insight that, well, maybe it really is possible that teaching 3-year-olds is a good idea. Or maybe it's conceivable that even 2-year-olds think very abstractly. They sometimes learn to question the meaning of slogans in the field, like constructivism, or other politically correct ideas. For us, this is, I think, the most problematic area. I'm not sure we do enough, I'm not sure we know how to do this, to help them challenge some very basic assumptions that they come in with and that are in the nature of broad values and ideologies, and to use the evidence to help them understand those. So, from what we can see then, just to summarize, the critical elements that they come away with, and I think that we should foster, are forming these dynamic images from video material, learning to observe, to ask, to think critically, to interpret, to reflect, to learn the content in a personally meaningful way, to apply the content, and to adjust their larger frameworks and values. And I think that this vital experience has been helpful in helping them to do that.